Hey guys, Colin here with ShiftSynth 1. Looks like we got a little visitor today. This is Charlie. He's down here. Hey buddy. Today we're going to need a little therapy dog because the LFO section is a monster. And today we're going to be covering the low frequency oscillator. It's right here in the synth engine. We're actually just going to be covering LFO 1 today. And actually I think I'm going to split this up into two lessons because the LFO is so massive and so complicated that I think I'm going to need two lessons to really get into. Today I'm going to focus on applying the low frequency oscillator to a source. We're going to be going over the wave types, which is right here. And I'm going to go over a few of these miscellaneous tabs within the low frequency oscillator, just enough to get us to where I want us to be. But I'm definitely not going to cover all of it today. So I want to walk you guys through how this lesson is going to work and how I plan on illustrating some of these concepts, because a lot of the concepts are vague and esoteric and kind of difficult to follow. So what I've done is I've downloaded Gtune, which is this free tuner, and I know it may seem strange to look at a tuner for a low frequency oscillator section, but I think it's actually a really great way to understand what the low frequency oscillator does. The first thing that we have to do is apply the low frequency oscillator to a source, and that source is going to be the oscillator 1 pitch. So I'm going to go down to the mod matrix, I'm going to select oscillator 1 pitch, and I'm going to set the mod depth at like 20. I'm going to set the source at the low frequency oscillator plus here. So the low frequency oscillator is being applied to the oscillator 1 pitch. So that means when I press a key, the low frequency oscillator will be playing with the pitch of the synth. And that's what we're going to use the tuner for. But before we get there, I want to do a little bit of housekeeping just to make sure that we all are getting the same results from the low frequency oscillator. Because if you just have the default values from the initialized patch, it can cause some confusion. So this section here is actually a very important concept called sync. And when you initialize a patch, originally it will be set at free running, which just means that the low frequency oscillator runs non-stop behind the scenes. And whenever you press a key, you will enter wherever that is in the sequence of the low frequency oscillator. Now, if you have it set to key sync, it will start the low frequency oscillator every time you press a key. So I'm going to show you how that works really quick. I'm going to go over here to the tuner just so you guys can see. I'm going to test this out. So it's free running right now. So if I press this a few times, you'll see that we're entering at a different time in the low frequency oscillator every time I press the button. So you can hear it there. So I'm going to change this actually to key sync so that every time I press a key, the low frequency oscillator will start. So here, let me demonstrate that. It will start in the same position every single time. So there you have it. So I'm going to keep it key synced because it's going to make some of these illustrations a lot more obvious. If I kept it at free running, I'm going to be coming into a different position of the low frequency oscillator every single time I press a key, and it'll confuse you guys. So if you're following along, set that sync to key synced. Now we're in a good position to start discussing some of the concepts here. The wave section is what we're going to get into next. Now, when you open up this list, it can be rather discouraging because there's so many options. And most people are aware of the basics of low frequency oscillators. What a sine wave does, what a triangle low frequency oscillator does, what a sawtooth does, and a square wave. Now I'm going to show you really quick what those sound like because I want to get a comprehensive view of all of the functions of the low frequency oscillator, but I'm not going to go too deeply into what's causing these sounds. There's tons of resources out there on low frequency, the basics of low frequency oscillators. You guys can dig into that. But just to give you guys an example of what's going on here, I'm going to pull this down pretty low, actually. I'm going to pull the mod matrix down to like 5. My goal is to have oscillator 1 within 50 cents of its tuning, so that we can see this arrow bouncing back and forth. I don't want it jumping around a lot between notes yet. I just want you guys to be able to see what the low frequency oscillator is doing here. I'm going to set this to sine. I'm going to show you guys what this sounds like. So you can see it's starting on C and it's bouncing up just a little bit. So I'm actually going to adjust this to like 10. So, and you'll see that since I increase the depth, it will be bouncing up even more. And I don't like that since it's going all the way up to C sharp, so I'm going to take this down a little bit. So as you can see, even though I only adjusted the mod depth from 6 to 10, it had a dramatic impact. So keep that in mind when you're dealing with the mod matrix. Just slight adjustments here can cause really big shifts in your low frequency oscillator. Just want to get it to a place where I'm happy with it. There you go. It's like 50 cents above the note of C. So that's a sine wave. I'm going to quickly go through these other ones so you can understand what they sound like. Triangle's very similar to sine. A sawtooth will be choppy. As you can see, it's slowly decreasing towards the center and then jumping back up, just like a saw wave. And a square wave is just the extremes. So those are the easiest forms. Random SH will basically pull a random value within the mod depth and return that during one cycle of the low frequency oscillator. So if I press C here, it'll just skip around within the parameter of the mod depth. It's kind of like a square wave, but a square wave jumps between the lowest and the highest parameters of the low frequency oscillator. This will jump anywhere within the parameters of the low frequency oscillator. Time SH is a square wave, except a randomized square wave. So it's going to be jumping between the low and the high parameter value at random times. So just to show you what what that sounds like. It's just holding a C for a really long time. There it jumped. It's just going to randomly jump between those values every time this LFO cycles. So moving on, the piano envelope is a rounded saw wave. I'll get into this in the next lesson, but it's really great for shaping a single shot LFO to make keys sound like piano keys. And single shot just means that the low frequency oscillator is triggered once and then doesn't trigger again. It doesn't go through an LFO cycle. It's just a one-time thing. So the piano envelope helps you emulate piano sounds. It's really useful. It's worth playing around with. It's one of my favorite LFO parameters. The sequences are similar to the rand SH1, except instead of randomly bouncing between values within the mod depth of the LFO, it follows a specific pattern. So I'm going to turn up the mod depth here so you guys get a good picture of what's happening on the tuner. And then I'm going to pick sequence 1. I'm actually going to slow down the rate a little bit so that it's more obvious. Each one of these has a specific sequence that it follows before returning back to the starting tone. I'm not going to go through every one of those. You guys can explore it yourself. Alternate is similar to the time sh function, except instead of a random square wave, it is a alternating square wave, where it has a certain pattern that it follows, switching between the min and max value. I'm going to show you guys quickly what one of these sounds like. And there you go. So each one of these has a different pattern for flipping between the min and max values. So then we get into the sequence portion of the low frequency oscillator. Now this is when it gets a little bit more confusing. These don't really follow the same rules as a typical low frequency oscillator. They intended these to be used with a specific mod depth in mind. And those mod parameters are actually 30 or 36 in the mod depth. And the reason for this is if it's positioned lower than that, it doesn't hit the tonal objectives that they have here. For example, if I click chromatic, what we would expect is for it to go up a chromatic scale, which is going up one semitone every cycle. So if I set this at 30, let's set this at 10 so I'll give you an example of what it sounds like when it's not correct. I'm actually going to turn the rate up so it goes quicker. So the depth is just not there. It's not pulling a chromatic scale for you because I have the mod depth at 10. So if I turn this up to 30, it'll turn into a chromatic scale. Let me turn that down a little bit. There you go. Nice and crisp. So if I go down these, you can see that they occupy various scales, and you guys can explore these. One thing I want to point out is that sometimes the tonality will flip on you. For example, if I take the fourths and I play that at 30, it's not hitting it. So I have to actually turn this up to 36. There you go, that's the fourth. If you're playing with these arpeggiator waves or these scalar waves, then you might have to play around with the mod depth between 30 or 36 in order to get the tones that you want. It's useful to have a tuner here to give you guys a better understanding of what's actually happening. So that just about covers it for the types of scales. Once again, there's a lot of exploration to be done here. Just kind of feeling them out, seeing what you can get out of these things, playing with the rates, playing with the mod depths. This is just a brief introduction to kind of get you through what the heck is going on in the wave types. So that just about wraps it up for this one, guys. This might be a several part series. I thought I might be able to get through more of the low frequency oscillator on this lesson, but it's a huge section. In the next lesson, we're going to be going over the delay sync and the rate syncs, which have these really big drop downs. We're going to break down these subdivisions. We're going to talk about them in a way that's easy to understand, and hopefully get you guys in a better position to understand what the heck is going on in these subdivision sections. Once we get through that, that's the bulk of the low frequency oscillator. It won't take long to discuss the other parameters within this. Just bear with me, guys. This is a huge section and requires a lot of attention. All right, thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next lesson. Bye.